Anyway, I'm Wangler. I'm the president of BigHand. Welcome. Thanks for coming today. I'm your moderator. I get the best job in the world. I just ask questions, and the smart people get to give you all the good answers. We've got about 40 minutes, so this should be interactive. If anybody has a question along the way, please just raise your hand and say hello. So by way of introductions, right here we have Mark Cohen, who's the CEO of Legal Mosaic, which is a legal business consultancy providing strategic advice to corporate legal departments, law firms, legal service providers, legal networks, entrepreneurs, and law schools. Mark has a unique perspective, having been a civil trial lawyer and a managing partner in big law, and then serving as corporate counsel. He spent the last 15 years focusing on the business of law and improving access to and delivery of legal services. Mark has published more than 200 articles in mainstream legal and business journals, and he has a regular column in Forbes that many of you may have seen. He's done some similar stints with Bloomberg Big Law Business and Law 360. So welcome, Mark. Here I have Dan Safran. He's the president and CEO of LegalShift. It's an independent management consulting technology advisory firm that serves law firms and corporate legal departments. Dan's got over 30 years of experience, both inside and externally advising corporations and law firms on strategic growth, the application of business best practices, and leading the drive to operational excellence. Yeah, it's hard not to laugh when I introduce Dan in a nice way. Next, we have Janet Celly. Janet is the Chief of Business Operations at DLA Piper, a top 5 Global 100 firm. Janet was hired by DLA in May of 2011 to address the firm's objective to become more efficient and reduce the cost of infrastructure services. Prior to joining DLA, Janet was a vice president with Unisys, responsible for business development and project delivery for the Department of State, Energy, Commerce, and NASA, developing and managing a portfolio of over $350 million. Previously, she spent 27 years at Booz Allen, consulting to U.S. and foreign government agencies and U.S. corporations, apparently starting when she was 4, but welcome, Janet. And then finally, we have Sonji LeBlanc. Sonji is a senior project manager, has been with DLA Piper for over 15 years. She played a key role in the restructuring of their legal support operations and has been instrumental in the implementation and integration of BigHand Now's workflow technology support and enhance to the new team structure. So truly some experts in the industry and also back office efficiency, which we're going to talk about. So I'll start with a question for Mark. Mark, you've written a lot about the changing legal industry and law firms' reluctance to get with the times. Can you share with us your insights on the current state of the industry and some of the trends that you've been tracking?
Sure, thanks, Eric. Can everybody hear?
He's got you over there.
Is there any way we can turn up the volume a bit? How's that? And to echo Eric, if someone could tell the folks outside just to keep it down a little, that would be great. Okay, so I'm going to try to respond to a very thoughtful but open-ended question as succinctly as I can, and I'm just going to tick off in no particular order some things that I see as I go around the world and focus on different things related to the legal industry. So clearly what we're seeing all around the globe is, I think, an increasing awareness, particularly among legal buyers, that there is a difference between the practice of law, that is, those differentiated skills that demand a lawyer, a trained lawyer, participate in, and the delivery of legal services, which increasingly is becoming everything else. Where those boundaries are not as clearly defined, certainly in the corporate arena, as they are in the so-called people space. A second thing is we are seeing a very gradual but accelerating transformation of law being a very labor-intensive, brute force kind of application that is done by lawyers who think they are solving legal problems, and it is transitioning increasingly to a lot of legal work now being performed either by machines, by other professionals who are not licensed attorneys, or by paraprofessionals. That's a second thing. A third thing clearly we're seeing is an acceleration and broadening of the use of technology. And we're seeing technology in a lot of different ways. I like to say as a former trial lawyer that not all technology is the same. Some is much more material than others. I think technology is really as relevant as the problems it's designed to solve and the ease with which people can quickly become comfortable using technological tools. It's a means to an end, not an end to itself. And then finally, just to kind of cut it short, I think that what we're seeing also is, as part of the technological turn, we're seeing the legal industry increasingly being told by business that we want you to operate under the same sort of guidelines and modus operandi as we do, which means that it's not just about reducing cost, but it's also about increasing efficiency, increasing ease of access, transparency, and basically, to summarize, having the right person or right resource doing the appropriate task. And that's why, frankly, I'm kind of interested in what BigHand does, because I think that their technology does a very good job of not only capturing that, but also, I think, being used to know who's doing what and how efficiently. I think that's critical in today's global legal marketplace.
Thanks, Mark. So Dan, at Legal Shift, your team's kind of in the trenches, working with law firms and corporate legal departments every day. What are you seeing as the specific challenges that they're facing in the market? How are clients dealing with them, and how does that all relate back to efficiency in the back office?
Well, thank you, Eric. That's an excellent question.
Thank you.
Hopefully I can kind of see half the audience here. So, I think that there's a huge opportunity. I want to start out by saying I've never been more excited in my professional career than I am today in terms of what is now available and the focus of law firms in terms of attempting to look at efficiency and cost reduction. Much of this is driven by cost reduction, right? We know that law departments are putting in tremendous pressure on these law firms and trying to get them to change, and that also puts more pressure in terms of rates, and of course then that gets into obviously all of our costs, both our professional costs as well as our back office costs. I think that it has to start with some sort of assessment, right? You got to start with, hey, where are we today? What are we trying to achieve? And then trying to figure out, okay, what do we do? And the other thing that I typically see in the law firm marketplace is there's tend to be a focus on technology. And technology is great. I think all of us, I'm probably repeating something everyone knows, today it's really people and process are the hard part. Cultural change, et cetera. Technology is an enabler, but too many times we see firms that are focused on trying to build efficiency or lower cost, and the idea is we're just going to throw some technology at it. It's the easy button, we're all done. You really have to look at it holistically across kind of strategy, people, process, and technology. And then the other thing to look at is also, what do we absolutely need to be doing internally versus what are things that we as a law firm shouldn't be doing, and what are those things that are more commoditized, that our clients don't necessarily care about, that we can then take outside of the firm and use experts to do it effectively and less expensively.
Good, thanks. So I'm going to divert back to Mark for a moment, but Mark's worked on kind of both sides of the equation, both running a law firm and on the corporate legal side. And there's an obvious trend of challenges with demand in the market. So I guess two things. How do you see firms reacting to that, the change in the demand? And then additionally, what do you see as the barriers to change in law firms today?
Well, the short answer to the first question is how are firms reacting to it? I would say poorly. I think that most firms are looking at profit per partner, which has continued to be maintained, I think, quite surprisingly to me, well, since the reset, I think, that was caused by the financial crisis of 2008. As my friend Richard Susskind said many years ago, it's hard to tell a room full of multimillionaires that their business model is failing, especially when they're still making a lot of money. However, I would not focus longer term so much on PPP as I would on NPS, Net Promoter Score, which of course to anyone in business is the holy grail of metrics. To lawyers, it's largely unknown. And if you look, for example, at a recent study that was conducted by Cambridge University School of Business with LexisNexis, they determined that 25% of go-to law firms, I'm not talking about panel counsel, I'm not talking about firms who might have done a matter or two, I'm talking about when things hit the fan, these are the firms that are called. Only 25% of those firms got a positive Net Promoter Score. So that says to me that change is definitely going to come. So that's the first question. The second question in terms of
Barriers to change.
yeah, barriers to change. Well, I think Dan touched on it very eloquently when he said it's culture. I think that culture remains the largest impediment to legal industry change. Law has always been a guild. It was a world of lawyers and non-lawyers, as lawyers like to say. It was perpetuated by regulation, by structure, by economic model. And increasingly, I think we're in a stage now where it's the customer rather than the lawyers dictating the terms of engagement. And so you're seeing tremendous amount of work migrating from law firms to in-house departments. I think that's a question of, as between bad and worse, take bad. It's not the solution. I think most GCs I've talked to would say it's better than just leaving it with law firms, but it's not a long-term solution. And I think you're seeing also a tremendous rise in the prominence, the scope and the complexity of work being done by law companies who specialize in the delivery of legal services, but not necessarily the practice of law. Consider the fact that Ernst & Young, which I would call a law company, even though many in the legal profession continue to describe them as an accounting firm, they are an interdisciplinary global legal services company. And it might surprise some in this audience to know two little factoids. One is that Deloitte has the largest market share of any legal provider in the world. That includes DLA and other mega firms. The second little factoid that might surprise people is that already Ernst & Young has acquired another law company, Riverview Law. And what was not told in the initial stories on the subject, the very next day quietly announced that they had a 10-year long-term agreement to use Riverview's technology platform. So what that says to me, Eric, is that we're seeing a lot of things that should cause law firm managing partners, heads of technology, business operations people to say, it is really, really a changing market, and we'd better learn how to redefine and differentiate ourselves lest we be in a deep problem.
Thanks. So I'll ask the audience, especially the law firm members here, do you think there's a recognition of this demand problem and the need to make change? By a show of hands, are your firms recognizing this? Okay. Not maybe universal, but a good number. So Dan, we're going to kind of pull back to the back office restructure, the staffing. What are you seeing from a centralization effort, those kind of things? And I guess as you're kind of explaining that, maybe give us a little bit of the feet on the street view of missteps or successes.
Yeah, absolutely. As I said, a lot of this is being cost-driven, as you know, and I know for those of you that live in law firms, right, it's becoming increasingly difficult, right? You're asked to be doing more with less, and as you know, that trend is probably not going to change or turn. On the other hand, we were talking earlier, the economy is pretty good, and therefore there's still a lot of fat basically in law firms. I kind of joke that lots of times there's money just sitting on the floor, and you just got to identify where it is and pick it up and get it in your pocket. But the reality is, in terms of centralization and things like that, that's one of the techniques. Kind of give you a real tactical discussion. Working with about a 1,200 lawyer firm, they have a business intake team. The business intake team was actually, the request process was actually being routed to 5 different areas within the firm. So, obviously, from an outsider standpoint, you come in and you look at it and you kind of say, hey, wait, there's no single owner of this. And why don't we aggregate all of those functions into a single team with a single owner, and then look at process using either lean components or Six Sigma components. And by the way, there's lots of people out there who say lean, Six Sigma. Just so you know, those are 2 completely different disciplines. If anybody tells you and talks to you about lean Six Sigma training or certificates, it doesn't exist. But anyway, off my soapbox there for a second. But in any case, centralization is a big piece of this, right, in terms of 2 things. One, making sure you've got the right number of people, but the other piece is really the ownership piece. The other piece, is, again, as I talked about earlier, was, how can we do more with less? Where can we use less expensive resources, what we call right task, right skill? The mentality being, let's take the lowest expense resource with the lowest amount of skills to do that particular job. And that's an issue both on the back office side. Quite frankly, it's also an issue on the practice side, but I know that's not the focus here. And then lastly, the outsourcing component. What areas, as I discussed earlier, really make sense to really be doing internally? What really provides value added to your client set, and what stuff really doesn't matter, it's not core to the business.
Thanks. So Janet, you've been at the helm of the legal support team at DLA, and your firm's gone through a number of projects, I guess, around reorganization of the teams, back office support, and it's evolved a great deal over the last couple of years. What were the main drivers and motivations behind the changes?
Okay. Plan B. On the one hand, it was very simple, matter of economics. We wanted to reduce the cost of delivering administrative services. But looking department by department, it really required a little bit more finesse than just needing to cut costs. And where we started was in secretarial services, administrative services, if you will. And we had a model that was one size fits all. And it wasn't a sustainable model, and it wasn't going to be a model that we needed in 5 years, 10 years, because the way attorneys were practicing and the support needs that their support needs were changing. So our support model needed to change as well. What we needed to do was recognize the differences of the different categories of attorneys and be able to satisfy the support needs category by category while becoming more proficient, efficient, and less expensive. So to do that, we needed a lot of data, and we needed to get it both from attorneys as well as the secretaries and finding out what they were doing. So it was really all about developing a sustainable model, making people more efficient, and cutting the cost of the delivery.
So maybe simply put, what did you learn in that process? Maybe to help the audience, what would you do differently the next time, or what did you do that you felt worked really well?
Well, not having any better way to get at it, we really had to get, we did a lot of survey work. We needed to know what it was that attorneys needed, The older traditional attorneys wanted something and needed something different than new partners, who also needed something different than the associates. And I'm sure I'm not telling any of you anything, but we had a model that supported everyone the same way, and it wasn't working for everyone on the receiving side. So we had to survey to find out what the demand for services, what their needs were, our customers' needs were. And then we also wanted to find out exactly how the secretaries were spending their time. So we had to do a lot of time and motion studies and keeping diaries and just collecting a lot of manual data. And to be able to get at just being able to prove that it's not efficient to having one person doing 32 different things for one partner, that differentiation of skills and talents and roles was where we were going to gain proficiency. We were able to support associates as a group in a very different way, a pooled resource, if you will, where we could get 7 to 11 associates on one administrative staff, because we were now working inside of a team. And one person can't support 7 people or 11 people, but 5 people can support 50 people a lot easier. And so we were looking for a model that would support the different categories of customers in a way that allowed us to be more flexible as things changed moving forward. And a lot of that was a result of breaking down those old relationships of one attorney, one secretary, and getting people used to using more than one person, or getting to use a resource pool that might not be right outside their door, might be on a different floor. So it was about a lot of data and breaking down things into a more efficient fashion.
I see Dan is like chomping at the bit to get the microphone from you, so I'm going to let him go. But just maybe, Dan, if you could add some color on what you've seen in some other firms, maybe good or bad.
Well, the important, one of the important things I picked up from Janet in her discussion is the fact that it's hard to do this analysis without data, right? And that's been the big missing link from my perspective. There's never been, that is an area where you need technology to really help you gather what people are doing, how much time they're spending, what are the activities, and that's the tough part, right? So actually, this is a true story. Last week I was at about a 900 lawyer law firm. The managing partner said the following to me. He said, "My spidey sense says we have too many people in this area." And I'm thinking, seriously? But what I like about what BigHand is bringing to the marketplace is the first time the ability to actually capture the tasks, the time, and what people are working on, so you can make actually informed quantitative-based decisions where you never were able to do that before. Thank you for letting me opine.
There you go. So Sonji, you were very heavily involved in the changes to the back office structure at DLA. You kind of more or less managed that process to a great degree. Can you kind of take us through what the strategic objectives were and how that went?
So once we decided that we were going to start moving into more of a team approach to our legal support, we did have an internal tool that we were using, but it got to a point where it just wasn't meeting our needs any longer. We wanted something that was more robust, more fluid, and more visually easy to view all the tasks at once in a dashboard setting. And also we wanted for our staff to also be able to begin to delegate those tasks that were appropriate to lower cost resources. So that's when we decided to take that step and move on to BigHand.
So with, good tee up there. So again, Sonji, with the BigHand Now workflow technology, you deployed it to support the teams and the new structure. Touch a little bit on how that helped you get the right work to the right resource,
Right.
and the benefits of that, maybe.
Well, we found that a lot of the staff they were working in silos. We knew that many of our staff would be retiring eventually, and we wanted to start sharing not only delegating to the lower cost resources, but we also wanted to start sharing knowledge and training our junior staff. And by having a tool where everyone could see what work is available within their team, they were able to find opportunities to learn and to actually be more engaged in what they're doing, because they weren't just stuck doing what they would have to do. They were able to shift, and so it really helped with morale in that regard.
So it was a pretty big change. How did you deal with kind of the change management aspect of it and the implementation?
Right. It's a culture change. I mean, definitely, and it shouldn't be overlooked. But I feel that people see the benefits when, if they're already using, they're already delegating, working in a team. That day when they need to go home, it's not as impactful because they already are working with people who know their desk, know their jobs, and they can set it up so that it's seamless for the timekeepers. So I think they see the benefits as soon as they want to go on vacation, or they call in sick.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So I guess again to the audience, how many of the firms out there are considering changes to structure in the back office? I mean, is that something that's top of mind? Okay, a few. So Sonji, maybe if you can just give us a little bit of kind of the benefits of you as the team, or looking after the teams and being able to get the work to the right people, just maybe touch a little bit more on the benefits as maybe from an overview perspective.
Right. I think there's a large benefit also for the managers primarily because they now have an idea of what their staff is doing. Before, everyone just had their heads down on their desk, and now they have this awareness of when there's a need for training, or when one person is maybe just focused on tasks that they shouldn't be. They can now help them become better team members and get that training they need and move the task to the right people. So I think from a manager standpoint, it's been a great advantage. Sorry, she stole the mic.
I actually really wanted to add that the data that we now have helps us with recruiting. You can see what the work is, and just because we lost one particular talent doesn't mean that's what we need to replace. So by seeing what the volume of the data is and where it's going, you also you're able to better know what type of talent you need to have. We also had a great focus on reducing secretarial overtime. And so knowing who is doing what and where they're sending their work or not delegating their work, but needing to work overtime is a great management tool. And we've been able to, in 5 years, we have reduced our overtime to like next to nothing. As if you can see somebody that's not using resources to help them do lower level administrative work, and yet they have to put in 2 hours of overtime every day. You've got a management problem that you can now address because you see what's going on. So it's helped us in many ways that we had not anticipated when we first went down this road. And another advantage that we are just now really recognizing the benefit of is we have a outsourced document production support group that is also on BigHand. And so having that seamless interaction between us and a third-party vendor that is providing our 24/7 support. And that vendor had already been well down the road with BigHand, moving on to that platform. So that was just a natural move for us so that we could work seamlessly across that divide.
I guess you partially answered kind of what's next, but outside of the outsourcers and kind of bringing that work into the tool, what else do you see as go-forward goals?
Well, we actually have other departments that are quite interested in it. Library research services, so putting requests into a workflow tool that reaches the library team. We're investigating the use of potentially sending tasks to paralegals via BigHand. Our billing department is looking into using it through the pro forma process. So we have other departments that are really looking at using it in different ways than we had ever anticipated.
Very good. So I guess one other thing that seems to be a pervasive theme that we've been picking up at this show and some others is that the role of the generalist legal secretary in a lot of firms is all but dead. If for no other reason than it's hard to recruit for those roles, right? That's a unique skill set that you don't find in kind of the next generation of support. I guess to the panel, any commentary around that? Is that a dynamic that you're feeling?
That was one of the reasons that we went to a team concept to begin with for our secretarial services and put various levels in that structure because we knew we couldn't keep hiring that traditional legal secretary. So we are able to hire at a lower level educated people who don't have legal skills but have the skills and the thinking that we're interested in. We're able to bring them in and pair them up with more senior people who are able to then help them on the job training. And we're able to train and grow our own. And we're developing our own training programs to make it more repeatable. But what we're ultimately going to need at that higher, more experienced level is changing also. So we're not going to continue to need that traditional legal secretary. It's probably going to be more of a blend of a secretary paralegal. But knowing that we couldn't keep hiring it and it was going to change over time, we wanted to be able to have our own in-house program where we could keep building the resources that we needed.
Thanks. So I'm going to leave a couple minutes at the end if anybody has a question, but I thought I'd wrap up with just maybe, Mark, if you can give us your opinion of the risks of no action, right? So if we continue to try to do business the way we always have, how do you see that evolving over the next several years?
Well, the first thing is, what's a lawyer? And it's funny, if I go around the world and I ask that question to licensed lawyers and others, and it's really pretty amazing that you will not get the same answer from any group of lawyers, and even less so with other legal professionals or people who routinely work with or deploy lawyers. And I think that a law firm basically has to realize that it used to be in the business of selling just one thing, legal expertise. That was it. And law firms had a virtual monopoly over supply and demand. The law firm dynamic with its customers was one of personal relationships. There was very little to do with performance. I always used to think it was kind of comical when people would, hire me and people would say, "Oh, he's a great lawyer," but and I was very happy, and I certainly didn't want to disabuse them of that. But they made that assumption based on hearsay, what other people had told them, or word of mouth, or just sort of anecdotal evidence, the spiny phenomenon that Dan talked about. Well, we've kind of moved from an era of the spiny sensation to data. And I'm not suggesting that data is a panacea. Some data is highly relevant. Some data is totally useless. But certainly, as the panel has indicated, where the data is focused on shining a spotlight on who's doing what, on how things can be done more efficiently. And by the way, not just in terms of the internal application of being efficient and what it does to the bottom line, but also the external, which is that law has always moved at its own pace, right? And you try to tell someone who's not a lawyer, look at the Mueller investigation. Non-lawyers think it's dragging on, forever. Lawyers think it's going very quickly. And I think that at the end of the day, like it or not, that differentiator is going to be determined not by lawyers, but by people who consume their services. I wrote a piece recently talking about how law has to start moving at the speed of business. Because you talk to a business person and she or he is not interested in all the legal gobbledygook. They want answers and they want it quickly because that's the world that they live in. So just to sum up, Eric, I would say that if I were, again, a managing partner of a law firm, I would be looking to who's doing what inside my firm, what kind of tools might be available to me that would allow me to make that determination, not on a spiny basis, but on a data-driven basis. That would be good for me as a manager, and that would be good for me with my clients, because I'm turning things out more quickly, which is what they want in the first place. And I would take a hard look in the existential mirror and say, what is it that we as a firm do well? And what can we do on a differentiated basis? What can we sell that others can't? And are we cost competitive as well as expertise competitive? And by the way, when should we insource? When should we outsource? When should we collaborate? These are things that most people who are sitting in the manager's office of law firms were not schooled in. This is asking generally older dogs to learn new tricks. That's a tough thing to do. But I think that if that is not done, and I hate to predict dire consequences, but I think the data is already very clear that in the marketplace, there is increasingly now a huge divide between a small group of about 20 or so brand differentiated law firms who can pretty much do many of the things that they were doing historically because they have such rarefied expertise and track record that the market will pay a premium for that. But it's sort of like, the difference between in medicine, and I think medicine is extremely instructive for law in terms of the division of labor, the impact of technology, how doctors now are working with other medical professions. All of these things, I think, are going to be indicators of where law is headed. And I think that a law firm that doesn't get with that program may find itself out of business.
Very good. So we're going to wrap up there. Does anybody have any questions for the panel while we have a couple of minutes left? Go ahead, Dan.
I have a question. This is unprepared, so to Janet and Sonji. So it's really a two-part question. One is, how did you sell this concept? And I'm assuming BigHand probably didn't give you the software. I'm sure they gave you a great deal. But in any case, how did you sell this internally for the need to do this? And then secondly, you talked briefly at a high level about the change management side. How did you present this to the administrative folks within the firm? Because I'm sure there is an initial reaction of, oh my God, I'm going to be measured for everything.
Well, Sonji indicated that we had built an internal tool that then we outgrew, and we just could not make it, do what we needed to do. So we did need to look for a commercial product. So we were well into the structure, and we were well into the process, and now we needed something bigger to support making it happen. So we had a good business need to go to the market to look. So that was, really the business case on which we were able to move into the market and buy a commercial product. But as far as selling the change, a couple of things. We, to reduce headcount, and that was one of the major, we knew we had too many secretaries. So in order to massively reduce headcount, we did a very soft and generous buyout on a voluntary basis. So that got us down to a manageable group of people that we then needed to work with to organize and deliver the service. And so to the extent that you can work with them and get them to buy into the construct that you're putting them in, and you make them excited about it, the secretaries can sell a lot for you to the attorneys. Because if the secretaries are happy, the attorneys are happy. The other thing that we did was we piloted, and not only in a small office, like we piloted the new team delivery construct for the associates in our New York office, and it worked incredibly well. We then did it in Chicago, so we did two of our biggest offices. So if you pilot something, you do it well, You learn from that. You fix what you know, as you learn. You get your champions, you prove it out, and if it can work in New York, it can work anywhere. And so then it was much easier to sell it elsewhere. And we actively engaged secretarial teams from one office with another. So as we were rolling it out, you know, San Diego, call your counterparts in New York and talk to them and see how it's working for them. And that was a big boost to this will work, they like it, we'll like it too, the attorneys bought into it. So a lot of it was internal selling, doing small things, proving it out, and then creating a groundswell of excitement amongst the people themselves to sell it for us.
Thank you. Don't give Dan the mic. We're going to wrap up there. Can't take any questions. However, we'll all be here milling around for a couple of minutes. Thank you for attending. We are in booth 715 and 717, just right over here. If anybody would like to arrange a demo, a meeting, etc., just come to the booth. We can handle that. And thank you very much. Appreciate it.